The megacity shined every night with bright billboards, rushing cars, and endless noise, and at the center of it all stood the giant church, House of Eternal Grace, where people said miracles happen every Sunday, and Pastor Malachi, famous, respected, almost worshipped, walked proudly through the crowd as if God himself lived in his shadow. 18-year-old Chinaza, a quiet girl with soft brown skin and long flowing hair, joined the choir because she loved singing, but every time Pastor Malachi passed near her, she felt a strange cold breeze on her skin, like someone invisible had touched her back, and she didn't understand why. When Chinaza and her father Yuzechukwu first attended the church, everyone welcomed them with smiles, drums, and music, but as the crowd danced, Chinaza noticed Pastor Malachi look at her with eyes too sharp, too heavy, almost as if he already knew her from somewhere she had never been. Malachi appeared on TV every morning praying for the nation, he fed beggars for the cameras, he visited hospitals, and people cried when he touched them, calling him the Holy Lion, but deep inside his expensive office, behind gold-plated doors, he often sat alone breathing heavily like someone running from a secret. One evening after choir practice, Chinaza was packing her bag when the lights flickered, and she heard a soft whisper behind her saying her name, but when she turned, no one was there, only her reflection on the long glass window, looking strangely frightened as if it wasn't fully her. 19-year-old Yuzechukwu, Chinaza's elder brother, worked long taxi nights, and every time he dropped her at church, he felt something strange around the building, like the air was too heavy, but because Malachi was so respected, he pushed the feeling away and told himself it was only stress. Elder Jide, the oldest man in the church, watched Malachi carefully from afar, saying nothing but observing everything, and whenever Malachi prayed on the pulpit, Jide's heart shook because the pastor's shadow sometimes looked bigger than his body, stretching as if it had a life of its own, but Jide kept quiet, afraid of causing trouble. During a Sunday service filled with music and shouting, Malachi touched people and they fell under the spirit, but when he placed his hand on Chinaza's head, a shock ran through both of them, so strong that he quickly removed his hand, hiding his surprise with a smile while Chinaza stood trembling for reasons she couldn't explain. After that Sunday, some church members began whispering that something unusual happened on the altar, and even though nobody could explain it clearly, videos spread online showing Malachi flinch the moment his hand touched Chinaza, making thousands of viewers argue about what they had witnessed. That night, as rain washed the city and thunder cracked the sky, Chinaza dreamed of a tall glowing man standing on the rooftop of a skyscraper, pointing at the church and saying, "Beware of the man whose shadow lies," and she woke up sweating, shaking, and knowing deep in her heart that her life had just stepped into something she wasn't ready for. Rumors spread that Pastor Malachi laid hands on a blind teenager named Tiga and the boy claimed he instantly saw, but minutes later, he quietly told his mother outside that the pastor whispered, "Say you can see or I will curse your family," making the mother tremble in fear and confusion. A heavily pregnant woman named Mrs. Kofayat fainted on stage during a deliverance, bleeding heavily as Malachi stepped over her body shouting fake prophecies instead of helping, and the entire congregation cried thinking it was a sacrifice of redemption. A young assistant, Emeka, mistakenly opened Malachi's locked prayer room and found an altar with burnt black candles, feathers, human photographs pierced with pins, and a red bowl filled with something that smelled like blood, making him run out shivering. During a healing line, when Malachi touched people's foreheads, many screamed that his hands felt like fire, but nobody knew it was because he rubbed his palms with a hidden mystic ointment from a Ghanaian sorcerer before stepping on stage. A quiet church girl, Sonia, stopped attending after Malachi told her he saw her future husband in a vision, and tried to lure her into his office alone. She ran home crying and her mother warned her never to tell anyone or the pastor might curse them. A well-known investigative journalist, Mrs. Ozoman Wood, received an anonymous tip to investigate the church, and though she was skeptical at first, she sensed something dark beneath the fancy sermons and celebrity members. Mama Chaik, a poor trader, cried uncontrollably after selling her last goods to sow a destiny sacrifice seed, only for her son Chaik to be sent away from school the next day for unpaid fees while Malachi bought a new Lexus. Neighbors living beside the church reported hearing loud screams coming from Malachi's office at 1 a.m., but when police came to check, he smiled, pointed to his Bible, and said he was casting out demons, and everyone believed him, everyone except the neighbors who heard a girl crying. A choir member, Lillian, confided in her close friend that Malachi touched her in an inappropriate way during prayer counseling, and her friend told her to stay silent or risk bringing a spiritual curse on her entire family. Even the loyal deacon Mr. Bartholomew began to notice that the miracles felt staged and the pastor's smile no longer reached his eyes. When he tried to ask a question, Malachi gripped his shoulder painfully and whispered, "Never question the anointed." When the church accountant Mr. Collins discovered 42 million Nigerian nairas missing from the ministry account, Malachi told him, "Touch my finances and your firstborn will not wake up tomorrow," making Collins shake violently and walk away in silence. A university student, Irene, fainted during a deliverance session, foaming at the mouth after Malachi pressed her head too hard, but instead of calling for medical help, he shouted, "The demon is stubborn," while her friends cried helplessly. A black-clothed stranger with tribal marks, Boba Kofaru, visited the church at midnight, and Malachi bowed before him, whispering, "Master, I have brought more souls," while Boba handed him a bag dripping with something wet. A wealthy politician's daughter, Daniela, came to the church for healing from depression, but Malachi saw her beauty and promised her special deliverance. Alone in his office, the girl left the church that night unable to speak, trembling violently. The church security guard, Mr. Adibeo, caught Malachi bearing something behind the church at 3 a.m., wrapped in white cloth. The pastor saw him, smiled slowly, and said, "If you speak, the earth will swallow you." Journalist Ozoma came back with a camera crew, pretending to do a documentary on megachurch success. Malachi welcomed her politely, hiding his fear, while Ozioma's eyes scanned every corner, convinced there was something demonic about the air in his office. During cleaning, Emeka found fresh drops of thick red liquid under the pulpit, and when he tried to wipe it, it stained the mop black instead of red, making him scream and run, but Malachi only smiled and said, "Some stains come from the spirit world." The pastor announced a 7 nights of supernatural wealth transfer program, causing thousands to flood the church. Every night he staged miracles using hidden chemicals, planted actors, and hypnotic chants learned from Boba Kofaru, making the whole city talk about him on social media. During a healing service, a camera from the church media team accidentally fell, capturing the reflection of Malachi's face in a glass, his eyes briefly glowing red, and the cameraman, Femi, froze in terror before Malachi calmly walked toward him with a slow smile. Mrs. Ozioma later examined footage from her visit and noticed a shadow behind Malachi that moved even when he stood still, and she whispered, "Something is living inside that man," making her vow to uncover the truth no matter the danger. During Sunday service, a small boy named Ebube suddenly screamed, "Pastor's shadow is not human," and pointed at Malachi, causing the entire church to panic, until Malachi placed his hand on the boy's head and the child collapsed instantly. Ebube's mother, Mrs. Helen, wailed uncontrollably as ushers carried her unconscious son away, while Malachi preached louder, drowning her pain with forced hallelujahs as guilt flickered across Bartholomew's eyes for the first time. That night, Deacon Bartholomew dreamt of Malachi standing over a burning city, holding chains attached to crying church members, and when Bartholomew woke up sweating, he realized he was clutching his throat as if someone had tried to choke him in his sleep. Mama Chike fainted during offering time after realizing she had nothing left at home for her son Chike to eat. She cried so hard that people sitting around her started crying too, yet Malachi scolded her for dishonoring the altar with poverty. Daniela's father, Honorable Chief Obiora, stormed the church demanding to know what the pastor had done to his daughter, but after 5 minutes inside Malachi's office, he walked out silently, trembling like a man who had seen death. Blogs and radio stations began to gossip about strange happenings at Firelight Cathedral, but nobody dared accuse Malachi publicly because his influence reached top politicians, celebrities, and even police commissioners across the city. One morning, the church arrived to find Mr. Adibeo, the security guard who saw Malachi bury something, missing. His uniform was neatly folded on his chair with a note that simply said, "Forgive me, I cannot fight this darkness." During Saturday cleaning, Workers found a large dark stain behind the pulpit. They scrubbed for hours, but the stain got darker, not lighter, until everyone ran out crying, begging Malachi to pray, but he simply said, "Some things are not meant to be cleaned." Mrs. Ozioma finally interviewed a former church member who confessed that Malachi forced her to swallow a strange black liquid during deliverance, and she had been battling nightmares, paralysis, and unexplained marks on her body ever since. That evening, a video clip leaked online showing Malachi's eyes glowing faintly red during a service. Some said it was camera error, some said it was demonic power, but for the first time, the city began to fear that their beloved pastor was not who he claimed to be. One night, Malachi awoke to find his own shadow detaching from the floor, crawling toward him like a living creature. He screamed, punching the air and shouting incantations, but the shadow hissed and vanished into the city streets, leaving him shaken, pale, and powerless. Elder Jide received an anonymous USB stick containing footage of Malachi performing unspeakable acts in the shrine at the waterfront. As he watched, he trembled, knowing that the truth could destroy Malachi's empire, but also put their lives in grave danger. During rehearsal, Lillian suddenly screamed as a dark shape seemed to wrap around her arms. The choir members screamed in panic, while Chinaza ran to her side, sending a warm golden glow from her hands that repelled the darkness instantly. Malachi summoned his most loyal followers, the inner circle, to the basement under the church. They chanted furiously, demanding that Chinaza be captured, but as they raised knives and charms, a sudden gust of white wind from nowhere scattered them, leaving Malachi trembling in fear for the first time in years. Chinaza walked home through a quiet city park when masked men appeared, surrounding her with weapons. Just as one raised a dagger, her chest glowed brightly, pushing them back violently, while a voice thundered from above, "Touch not my chosen," forcing them to flee, terrified and bewildered. Uzochukwu ran from a nearby street to help Chinaza, lifting her gently in his arms as she trembled and cried. For the first time, he realized her gift wasn't just protection, it was divine power that could challenge the darkness itself. Back in his secret chamber, Malachi pleaded with the spirits that had long served him, begging for their loyalty. Instead, they hissed angrily, accusing him of failing to contain Chinaza, and for the first time he felt fear gnaw at him as the power he relied on began slipping through his fingers. Mama Grace secretly met Elder Jide in a quiet cafe on the city outskirts, revealing all she had seen, the sacrifices, the disappearances, the unnatural powers. Together, they vowed to expose Malachi, understanding that only the truth could break the darkness he wielded. During Sunday service, Chinaza led the choir. Her voice, glowing with warmth and purity, moved the congregation to tears, while Malachi watched from behind, his eyes dimming as he realized her innocence and faith were weakening his dark influence in the city, and that the end of his empire might be near. Finally, Malachi stepped onto the stage to preach, but the LED screens behind him switched on by themselves, playing the shocking footage from Elder Jide's USB drive, rituals, sacrifices, and unnatural powers captured in horrifying detail. The congregation screamed, and Malachi froze, the city finally witnessing the full scope of his deception. As the scandalous LED footage went viral, thousands of church members fled the auditorium in panic, some crying, some screaming, while a few loyalists clung to hope. Malachi stood frozen, realizing that his influence over the city was slipping faster than he could control. Police, tipped off by Elder Jide and Mrs. Ozioma, arrived at Firelight Cathedral, confronting Malachi during a live service. He shouted threats and waved his hands, attempting to summon dark forces, but his spells flickered weakly as city lights outside shone too bright for his shadows to hide. Chinaza ran to comfort the children present during the chaos, including Ebiub and Chike, singing softly as golden light radiated from her hands. The children wept, hugging her tightly, while even hardened officers paused, feeling a strange calm wash over the area. Investigators broke into the church's basement and discovered the hidden shrine Malachi had used for years: burnt candles, carved idols, animal bones, and jars filled with dark liquid. Photos and documents linking politicians and wealthy donors to the dark activities were scattered everywhere, shocking the city. Mrs. Ozioma broadcasted the story live, and social media erupted. Hashtags exposing Malachi trended nationally, citizens gathered in front of the cathedral to witness justice unfold, while Malachi's once loyal followers began abandoning him, terrified of being implicated. Cornered by police and the press, Malachi tried to preach again, but the words faltered. He broke down, revealing some of his atrocities, yet claiming, "Forces beyond my control made me do it," leaving the congregation stunned, weeping, and enraged. Chinaza stood at the pulpit the next day, offering prayers for victims, the weak, and the broken. Her golden light filled the auditorium, bringing relief, healing, and hope to people who had suffered, and many members wept uncontrollably, feeling their faith restored in the face of darkness. Desperate, Malachi attempted to flee through the city streets at night, but shadows he once commanded now turned against him, tripping him, scratching him, whispering all the curses he had placed on others back at him. He ran blindly, terrified, knowing the city had turned against him completely. Police finally cornered Malachi in an abandoned warehouse. As he shouted in rage and fear, he was handcuffed, his mystic powers unable to escape justice. Photographers captured every moment, and the city erupted with cheers, knowing the man who deceived, terrorized, and murdered in the name of God was finally caught. As the news spread, thousands poured into streets, crying tears of sorrow for the victims, joy for the captured, and relief for the city. Chinaza watched quietly, holding Mama Grace, and whispered, "Even the darkest night ends when truth shines." Malachi sat in his jail cell alone, bruised, pale, and trembling. Memories of every innocent soul he had flooded his mind, making him weep quietly for the first time in decades, realizing the empire of lies he built had collapsed under its own darkness. Victims' families gathered in city halls and homes, crying tears of relief and gratitude as missing children returned and survivors shared their stories. Mama Grace hugged each mother and whispered, "The city will breathe again because the light came." Chinaza led a massive prayer in the city square, her hands glowing as she blessed the streets, hospitals, and homes of those affected. The crowd wept as they felt an overwhelming peace, knowing the darkness that had haunted them for years was finally gone. Malachi, in solitary confinement, begged for forgiveness from the spirits he had served and the city he had betrayed. For the first time, he prayed not for power, but for mercy, realizing too late that no spell or dark charm could erase the lives he ruined. Abub, Chaik, and other children gathered at the cathedral to sing praises under Chinaza's guidance. Their voices, clear and pure, echoed through the city, wiping away fear and planting hope, bringing both tears of sadness and joy to every listener. Newspapers, radios, and social media shared stories of bravery, survival, and exposure. Citizens held street festivals to honor victims and whistleblowers, the city alive with celebration, yet tinged with reflection on how darkness can hide behind holy words. During his trial, Malachi confessed publicly to every atrocity, the sacrifices, the manipulations, the occult practices. The courtroom shook with cries from victims, some fainting, some screaming, some finally shedding tears of closure, knowing the truth had won. With Malachi in prison and his followers disbanded, Chinaza led rehabilitation programs for affected families. Mothers and fathers wept as they hugged their children, young adults shared stories of resilience, and the city felt alive again for the first time in years. Chinaza, Mama Grace, and Elder Jide stood together on the cathedral steps as sunlight bathed the city. Her golden glow lingered as a symbol that truth, purity, and courage could overpower darkness, leaving every citizen inspired and emotional. Stories of Malachi's fall and Chinaza's courage spread beyond the city. Children told tales of bravery, journalists wrote epic chronicles, and the people began whispering, "When darkness rises, light always finds a way." Malachi stood in court, shackled and broken, facing the families he had tormented. Victims recounted their pain with tears streaming down their faces, while the city watched live, realizing that the once feared pastor could no longer hide behind power, mystic spells, or false miracles. The city square outside the courthouse was packed, banners displayed the truth of his atrocities, and people shouted for justice. Malachi's followers had abandoned him completely, and for the first time in decades, the pastor felt the weight of loneliness and humiliation crush him entirely. Abub, Chaik, Lillian, And other brave children stood in front of the court, holding hands and singing a song of courage taught by Chinaza. The melody, pure and haunting, broke the hearts of even the toughest officers, and the city wept, inspired by their bravery. Chinaza appeared in the courtroom, her presence radiating golden warmth. She pointed to Malachi and whispered a prayer that seemed to make shadows tremble, and for the first time, the city could see that purity and faith were stronger than any dark power. Malachi's final plea for mercy was rejected. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, citing the lives he destroyed and the unnatural acts he committed. As he was led away, his eyes, once glowing with deceit and arrogance, reflected nothing but fear and emptiness. Chinaza led the city in remembrance ceremonies, praying for every lost soul, comforting victims, and guiding families to rebuild. Tears flowed freely, but they were tears of relief, closure, and hope, as citizens realized the darkness that haunted them had been lifted forever. Street festivals, prayers, and public gatherings filled the city. Journalists, social media influencers, and ordinary citizens celebrated the courage of the young, the resilience of survivors, and the power of truth, making the city alive with joy, reflection, and a renewed sense of faith. Chinaza, Mama Grace, and Elder Jide became icons of bravery, integrity, and hope. Schools, churches, and communities across the city began telling their story as a lesson that no darkness, no matter how powerful, can triumph over courage, faith, and truth. The families of victims hugged, kissed, and cried in the streets. Children laughed for the first time in years, mothers and fathers held their heads high, and even journalists wept as they recounted the epic fall of the once terrifying pastor, feeling a cathartic release as the city finally exhaled. Chinaza stood atop the cathedral steps, golden light surrounding her as the sun rose over the city. The crowd below cheered, cried, and sang, knowing that light had triumphed over darkness. People whispered her name in awe,